Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. You're going to listen to an interview with Jesse Solomon, founder and CEO of Emmer Co, working to change the chicken business from the ground up. We're going to talk about transparency and their first VR chicken experience. We're going to talk about regenerative agriculture and what the role of chicken and livestock is, but also about their challenges with investors and their relatively short time frame. But everything in agriculture takes time, especially building soil. Enjoy! Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the planet mattered. A podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. Before we get started, I've been recording these interviews next to my day job, and I will definitely continue to do so and release about an episode a month. But at the same time, I would love to take this further, share more interviews. There are many more stories to share on investing in regenerative food and agriculture. More depth, improve the quality, maybe even doing some video series. So I started a Patreon community, which makes it easy to support creators like myself. If these podcasts have been of value to you, and if you have the means, I invite you to support me and make this happen. For more information, please find the link to my Patreon account in the description below. And now, without further ado, the interview. Enjoy! Welcome to Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the planet mattered. I'm Koen van Seijen, your host. In the podcast of today, I'm joined by Jesse Solomon, founder and CEO of Emmer Co, a former investment manager who since 2015 sells heritage chickens from regenerative farms. I'm going to ask all about it. Welcome, Jesse.
Thanks so much, Koen, for having me. Excited to talk.
I always love to start with a personal question, and I think in this case it makes a lot of sense as well. How do you end up in regenerative agriculture to begin with, but heritage chickens as a niche within the niche of the niche?
So about 10, or actually more than that now, years ago, I read a book called Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. And after I finished that book, I instantly became a vegetarian. I decided that I couldn't eat the meat that I was eating anymore unless I knew exactly where it came from and I had a personal connection to it. So I started to hunt, and for me, that was the only way that I could trust that what I was eating was pure, that the animal was respected, and that it was the healthiest and purest form of food that I could eat, and that it tasted just amazing. So through hunting, I discovered a love and connection to food that I'd never had before. And it wasn't just about my own personal journey, but it was about bringing that meat back for family and friends and cooking these amazing wild game dinners and seeing how much more they appreciated their food when I could connect them in that extremely personal, intimate way. And that was really the genesis of Emmer Co. It started off as a question. It was, is there an opportunity out there where I can create a food company that can replicate that as close to wild experience for as many people as possible? And what did that mean? And when I stripped away kind of the layers of where I wanted to focus, the two things that were the most important were going back to animals that grew the way they were supposed to. So, they weren't manipulated for fast growth or, any kind of, non-welfare optimization, and raising those animals holistically with the environment so that you could actually improve the land. And these days you hear the phrase a lot of being carbon neutral, but it felt like we really had an opportunity to actually improve the soil health, sequester more carbon, grow taller grasses, actually have a net positive impact on land just by growing animals the way they used to be grown.
And do you still remember, because this is quite a big moment, I can imagine, when you first saw that agriculture or meat eating actually could have a positive effect on the land. Do you still remember when you came across that and what that did to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of had an intuitive sense for a long time. I spent a lot of time in Africa and in other emerging markets where there wasn't a whole lot of industrialized, mechanized agriculture. And so, historically, if farmers wanted to continue to farm in land that they lived in, you had to farm holistically. There wasn't this, this phrase regenerative agriculture. I mean, it used to just be called farming, because if you didn't regenerate the soil health and let land rest and have these holistic practices, you would ruin the land and you wouldn't be able to grow any food for your family. So I was always exposed to that way of doing things. But when we started Emmer Co, and we started with building our first regional production hub on the West Coast, I needed to find a farmer who could partner with me, who appreciated this way of raising animals. And the first time I was introduced to our current farmer, who is our partner in production, Tyler, up in Red Bluff. And I went out to meet him, and when we toured his property, he basically spent the first hour not even talking about chicken. We spent the first hour running around his ranch, where he kept pointing out various perennial grasses, like the purple needlegrass and others, and we were talking about clovers as indicators of nitrogen fixing, and it was like a crash course in soil health. And again, we barely said even the word chicken, and I knew that this was the guy that that I wanted to work with. And furthermore, the way that it really hit home was when you could see the results of this. He had been farming holistically for the last 10 years, and the soil on his property was extremely fertile. And even in a drought years, this was before a lot of the major rains came in California over the last winter, but the soil was healthy. There was kind of this meadow of grasses. The seeds were really soft, which is another indicator of health. And yeah, you could see the results.
Yeah, no, that sounds extremely interesting, and also at the same time a story that I've heard many times, where it starts with soil, and then in this case the chickens, etc., are almost a tool to build that. And of course you need to find a business model to work with those tools. And so you started to then you focus on chickens. And how did you build up? How does Emmer Co work at the moment? If I want to get chickens, where can I get them? How does it end up in my oven?
Yeah, so we're a wholesale business where we sell mostly to distributors and other partners who can then get our product, our chickens, to various consumers, whether it's direct at your house or if you're dining in a restaurant. So right now we sell to distributors who then sell to retail channels. We also sell to distributors who sell to restaurants and other food service operators. And then we work with great online partners who distribute direct to the consumer, people like Good Eggs in San Francisco, Amazon Fresh nationally, other partners like Wild Idea Buffalo. And yeah, these are, this is right now, for the fresh products, we're limited through logistics to the West Coast, but eventually we'd like to expand our production model on the East Coast and further afield, and make sure that our slow growth pasture raised chickens are as widely available for consumers as possible.
And when it came to, we're getting into the juicy details. When it came to choosing the chicken, where did you go? Because you come from an investment background and knew a lot about hunting and cooking. Where do you go to find these chickens and that fit so well on these lands, and that actually are the closest thing, as you said, you can basically get to wild?
Yeah, so you kind of start at the beginning. You go back, you do a lot of research. You first have to understand how the chicken industry evolved, and how we ended up at the current, with the current system, which predominantly raises a Cornish cross breed, which is the type of chicken that's kind of the modern conventional chicken. And that chicken, for some context, grows to market weight in about 42 days, sometimes a little less. And that has nothing to do with hormones or anything like that. It's truly through breeding over decades, that they've been able to identify various genetic markers that allow these birds to put on meat very fast. And what that means is when you have a bird that grows that quickly, its muscles outgrow its skeletal system. It has severe welfare issues and health issues. Its heart is the same size as it was 100 years ago, and yet now has twice the muscle mass that it has to pump blood through. So you have heart problems, you have lung problems, you have leg problems. And so when you understand the context of this industry, it becomes easier to identify where we kind of went off on the wrong track. And so we were able to find, older breeds of chicken, we call them slow growth breeds, that were, still developed with meat so that you could, have good yield on the carcass. They wouldn't really be like those yard birds that, a lot of people are used to in various countries, but these were bred for production, but still have, the slow growth so that their body and anatomy grows in sync with itself, and it develops a healthy immune system, so you never need antibiotics. And because their muscle and skeletal systems grow together, it means they're really active and they can run around and they can do all the things that chickens do, which are important for a soil-based regenerative production model where you want the chickens running around, you want them scratching up the soil, you need them to be warriors in the system and agents of that kind of healthy change.
And when you look at those farms, they fit in a larger system, they fit in a holistic management system. Can you briefly describe for anyone who's listening and hasn't seen that or hasn't heard about that, how they fit in there and what their role is?
Yeah, of course. So it depends on the region. So, obviously the environment in every part of the world is not the same. So what this looks like in South Dakota is very different from what it looks like in California. And even in California, what it looks like where we raise birds in Northern California is going to be different than what it looks like, closer to the coast. So just keep in mind that, it's a general term to describe farming in sync with the environment and never over impacting any one part of the ecosystem. So for us, it primarily means raising multiple species of animals in the same area of land and rotating those pastures with cover crops and rest so that you can always ensure that you're putting the right amount of nutrients into the soil and creating a healthy microbial environment so that you can grow deeper root structures and encourage perennial growth and grow taller grasses. So for us, we have cattle on the property, and those are the first. Obviously, this is a cycle, but if you imagine the cattle are in one pasture and they're trimming the grasses and depositing their manure, and then once the cattle move off of that pasture, then you come in with the chickens, and the chickens will forage and scratch up the cattle manure, help break that up and spread it around. Their manure is much richer and has a different NPK composition, and it's extremely fertile. And then once the chickens leave those pastures, you come back in with no-till cover crops, which are a varying mix of different legumes and other annuals that, again, help with deeper root structure and create that complex soil aggregate. And after the no-till cover crop comes in, then you're going to let those pastures rest for at least 6 months or more. And then and then again, you start the whole process again. And so when you have this kind of symbiotic relationship between chickens and ruminants like cattle or sheep, and then cover crops and rest, you get a really healthy engine that kind of starts working on its own.
And when you look at the farms and the farmers you work with, what's the difference for them working with you and selling those heritage chickens through you instead of maybe doing it themselves, or what's the difference it means for in their daily lives?
Yeah, so our model is very different. As we grow, what we're excited about is rethinking all the parts of a meat production model. So not only the animals we grow, making sure they're healthy and slow growing, not only the way we produce these animals, so with regenerative practices that improve the soil health, and we're constantly thinking about that aspect, but it's also about the workers that we work with and what kind of company are we. And so we always say that the Co in our name, it actually doesn't stand for company. I intentionally named it this to stand for community. And I like when people say, oh, Emmer and Company, and I get to correct them. And I say, no, actually the Co, it stands for community. And that was important to us because I wanted to make sure that the community of people, whether it's our customers, our employees, or the workers we have in the organization, that they're front and center of everything we do. So what we get excited about is, again, flipping the model around. Up to now, most meat production has been built on a contract model where workers are extremely disintermediated from the end product that gets produced. And you have a contract model on one end of a system, and on the other end you would have a co-op model like Organic Valley. And I think there's room in the middle where we can take elements of a co-op where you can have profit-sharing pools and upward mobility and shared knowledge and a community of people that you can work with and really not feel like you're isolated, and yet actually also have elements of a company where we can employ the workers, we can give them health benefits, we can provide a pathway to being part of a bigger system. Because of the land, the way we grow these birds, it's not likely that you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who have the land base to do this kind of work, have the knowledge to do it, have the systems in place to do it. So we get excited about creating a different model where we can hire these workers. They can be trained on on training farms, and then eventually they could even manage farms if they wanted to. They could eventually, if they wanted to, even transition into the marketing department or other parts of the organization. They would have the opportunity to do that.
And if you look at the business, I mean, you started in 2015. What if we look? It's now July 2017. If we look a year ago, what has changed since then, and what was, let's say, the most difficult or maybe the most challenging? What really kept you up at night in the last year, and what can you share about that?
Yeah, well, pretty much everything keeps me up at night. This is what we're trying to do, which is rebuild a meat industry from the ground up.
Literally.
Yeah, literally from the ground up. It's really hard. This supply chain of food production, people barely have a glimpse at what this means. Our current food system is really, 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 really good at getting a whole lot of bad food to the most amount of people at the cheapest price. And they've built billions of dollars of infrastructure that help support that cycle of bad food to the most amount of people at the cheapest price. And they control all that infrastructure. So if you're trying to start a new kind of company that is trying to think differently about that supply chain, it's really challenging to stitch together infrastructure when you're really small, because food production is about scale. And even for us, we want to get bigger. We want to scale the right way. We want our regenerative practices to be, so widely practiced that they're everywhere in America and hopefully even further afield. But it's a challenge, and you have to work with a lot of great partners as you go and trust them and kind of stitch that system together until you get to a big enough scale where you can actually integrate some of those pieces of the supply chain. So I'd say what's changed since a year ago is the appreciation for what we do. We half of what we do is rebuilding the supply chain, and the other half of what we do is education and marketing, what it means to be regenerative, what it means to go back to slow growth breeds, and help people connect to food that for 60 to 100 years they haven't had this option, and so they're less familiar with what these words mean. Organic was really great, did an amazing job at teaching people to look at labels. But now we have to teach people to look beyond the label, because it's been too easy for large companies to take these labels that people think mean healthy, and they may or they may not. And so now we have to teach people to go beyond the label, to ask questions about breeds, to ask to see videos of where their food's produced. We put a virtual reality tour on our website at www.emmerandco.com/experience. And it's a as far as I know, it's the first VR chicken experience on the internet. And we did it to show people, like, this is our food. Like, there's no secrets. There's nothing to hide, and we can be 100% transparent. And I think consumers these days need to demand that level of transparency. And if producers or companies they're currently buying from can't provide this to them, they should probably ask why.
I think the education part is key there, and at the same time very challenging if you are operating in or living in food deserts and operating in places where you don't have access to that. Of course, the internet is helping in that. And what have you been working on? Let's something concrete on the last, the VR one is definitely one, but were there other things in the last few months that you're very excited about that just went live, or the things that are rolling out, or things that are part of the operation that really made a difference?
The VR experience was a great start. For us, it's again, we're educating a market that's been used to a certain kind of food system for a very, very long time. So our education initiatives will never end. They're a constant thing, and I get excited about it because it's so fun to be able to help connect people to where their food comes from in this really transparent manner. So the VR experience, we're going to be continually putting out white papers and infographics and data around what regenerative means in our practices. As we grow throughout this year, we're going to be bringing on more food customers. We're going to be expanding to different markets like Los Angeles. And as we do this, we're going to be organizing more events, whether it's community dinners or other various, kind of grassroots initiatives where we're excited about, continuing to spread these messages.
And when you started at the beginning, how did you start? Did you have any investors, or what was the birth of basically Emmer Co, and what was it like in the first period?
Yeah, so no, we don't have any outside investors. We're self-funded to date. There aren't a lot of investors who truly understand animal agriculture production. There's a lot of investors who understand that sector at the private equity level when you're a little bit bigger and profitable and you want to scale your infrastructure. There's those organizations have been financing the industrial food companies for a very long time. But from 0 to 1, this kind of early stage capital, there's very few investors who have the history of investing in this space.
Did you meet and talk to many or not?
Yeah. I've anyone who answers the phone.
Probably to all of them.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot. And
what are the two most common barriers that you find, apart from that they don't know it? I can imagine a lot, especially if you tell the story, are interested in it, but what has made it so far not a match?
Yeah, everyone's very interested in it. The not knowing it, so being outside the scope of their current remit or, what they're used to investing in, that's really important. That's an easy way for investors to lose a lot of money, is investing in things that they don't understand. But what that means is it creates a cycle where it's hard to kind of push people into a new thing if they haven't had the experience of doing it.
If they never tried.
So, I think there needs to be some activity on the investor side of them getting up to speed with what this means and learning, on their own. But I'd say the largest challenge, once they even possibly do learn about animal agriculture, meat production, et cetera, is the time horizon. So, we're used certain sectors of investment are used to a certain return profile and getting their money back in a certain time frame. They're often investing out of vehicles that are structured in 10-year time horizons. Animals take a long time to grow, right? If we're talking about changing soil health, that's not an overnight process, and you're never going to have the same kind of returns that you might have if you're used to investing in a technology company. A cow takes many years to grow, and that already would bite into a 10-year fund. So I think there needs to be some reorientation of expectations of, if you want to invest in animal agriculture or agriculture broadly speaking, and you have to understand that the time horizon and the return profile is extremely different. Now, for me, I think that's exciting because it provides diversification and kind of longer term stability. But it's just something that people are going to have to, uh, get comfortable with.
Yeah, and get off the... Also because a lot of these investments that have this extremely high return profile, of course, also have the extremely high risk profile that we often forget about because we only hear the stories of the 20x returns and 20x exits, etc. But yeah, you can, even if you would like to do that, you can only do it with a small part of your portfolio, and yet to be diversified and to have a connection with real assets. Agriculture seems to be a very interesting angle. And then, of course, as far as I'm concerned, regenerative agriculture has a completely different risk profile than chemical or industrial, however we call it. And in terms of, so you have been self-funded so far, you're going well, I assume. What's up for the next? I mean, you mentioned a lot of education parts, but let's say until the end of the year, in terms of they're going to be new cities, etc. Are going to be fundamental things inside the company that are changing as well that you're working on and that you could share?
Yeah, well, we're looking to expand our team primarily on the marketing side. So, if there's any great folks out there who are excited about marketing the future of agriculture and future of farming, please get in touch.
Give Jesse a call.
And yeah, the expansion of our customer base. So we've focused a lot on the San Francisco Bay Area for our restaurant food service customers. By the end of the summer, early fall, we'll be expanding with some really great customers and distributors in the Los Angeles area. And so that's going to be really exciting to just start working with some other great chefs and be able to, touch consumers in more areas. And as we expand those customer bases, that just allows us more resources to keep producing more content, keep educating, and just keep growing our supply chain. So those are the big initiatives. It's all about growing the right way, but
slow growing.
Yeah, slow. Exactly. We want to grow the right way, which is like our birds, like growing slowly. But at the same time, we do want to get bigger so that eventually we can own various pieces of our supply chain, so we can keep bringing our cost structure down. Whatever our current pricing is purely based on demand and the economies of scale that we get with working with third-party supply chain partners. So eventually, if we own our own processing plant, if we can contract directly for feed, all of these pieces allow us to keep reducing our pricing and make sure that we can get the most affordable product that is the healthiest and best for the land to the most people.
And just to get it out of the way, you mentioned feed. I've seen some articles on that. You are sometimes supplementing the feed of the chickens with a non-GMO, almost organic feed, right? That's the feed you're mentioning here.
Yeah, so the chickens are on pasture 100% of their lives. Like from day one to the time they're brooded out on pasture.
They don't even have a barn, right?
There's no barns. There's everything. Again, you come to the website and you can see what we mean when we talk about.
Yeah, we'll definitely link it below. It's a great experience.
When we say pasture raised, this is what we mean. We mean no barns, movable hoop houses. They're on pasture as early as possible. But so they're getting seeds and bugs and all sorts of things from the pastures. But you still have to supplement with feed that primarily is comprised of protein and carbohydrates. And right now, we work with third-party mills to supply that. Mostly most of the sources of the feed are sourced within California for the West Coast production. What we get excited about is as we grow and we can we have larger buying power, we'll be able to work with specific farmers who will be growing feed also in a regenerative process, where we're going to be working on no-tilling. We're working on crops that are able to create really deep root structures, rotating with the right kind of mix that is always ensuring, again, healthy soil, complex aggregates, these deep root systems that help trap more rainwater and sequester carbon. So it's just a process. You can't solve every problem on day one, but it's exciting that we're getting closer and closer to be able to keep fixing all these parts of the supply chain as we get bigger.
And I want to end with a question there. Actually, it's a two-folded question. that processing part, or actually your supply chain or supply stream, as some people in this podcast have called it, is that an interesting angle for impact investors who want to get into the regenerative agriculture space? In your specific case, would it be something that you're looking for funding at some point, maybe not now, but maybe in the future? And in general, if you would be a smart impact investor, where would you start if you want to get into the regenerative agriculture space?
Yeah, great question. So if you want to get into the regenerative agriculture space, I think first you have to think about what part of that sector you want to focus on. Do you want to focus on, meat production? Do you want to focus on the grain side of it? Do you want to focus on aquaculture and the fish industry? There are very different parts of regenerative agriculture that all have the same goals in mind. The insect meal industry as a replacement for soy and feed is a fascinating industry, something we get very excited about. I know the European industry is, I think, a little further along than the U.S. industry. That's a really fascinating sector. When it comes to our supply chain, the milling and the grain side of it, definitely there are third-party companies. That's all they do, and then there is a multi-billion-dollar global feed industry, and so that is definitely a sector that is interesting. On the processing plant side, it tends to be that those are not necessarily independent businesses that you would want to own. Rather, they are integrated pieces of an integrated company. And so for us, we will definitely look at raising capital for financing those kind of pieces of our supply chain, when we get to that stage. But I think that there's a really exciting opportunity to work with early stage companies like us and others who want to get to that stage. And, a small amount of capital in these early stages can really help us accelerate that process.
Yeah, because that will be actually my final question. I said it before, but this is my final one. What would you need to double your impact? And it could be investment, it could be much bigger education, it could be nonprofit, it could be, what would you envision for the next, let's say, 5 years or next few years actually, because you're still relatively small, to really double your impacts of hectares or birds? What would you measure? What would you look at if you want to achieve that?
Sure. So it would be investment to scale up our regenerative practices so that we could eventually have the scale to justify owning a processing plant, contracting directly with feed mills, so that we could get our cost structure down. So the faster we can get our costs down of our product allows us to expand our market dramatically and really opens up new distribution channels and new customers. And so the faster we can get our pricing down closer to where the larger conventional meat businesses are, that allows us to accelerate our impact overnight.
And do you see the larger meat industry as well? I mean, you see them under attack basically from all sides. Are their prices going to go up at some point, or that's just a race to the bottom until we find out all the scandals and all of that?
I think for a lot of the larger meat businesses, they've been operating in a conventional commodity-based market. There is a global chicken commodity business. There are global prices for beef, for chicken, for soy, these commodities. So they're already operating in a certain system that won't really allow them to raise prices. And, there's a market for every price point. I don't see KFC necessarily disappearing, and, KFC would never be able to afford our chicken based on what margins they need to hit and the price point of their products, and that's fine. I think what I get excited about is, again, it's choice. Right now consumers in the U.S. and elsewhere, they don't have an alternative choice for chicken, for pasture raised other meats that's at a price point that can make sense for them. So I think the big industrial food companies see the way that consumers are shifting, and they want to get exposure to that. But their core business is still very profitable and will be for quite some time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's very difficult to find, unless you live next to an holistically managed farm, who maybe is processing on the farm, which is almost never the case. It's very difficult to find meat and livestock that has been grown in the way that we like it to be. And I think that's difficult in the US, it's difficult here in Europe. And hopefully that will be a lot easier soon. So I want to thank you so much for your time and whatever you shared. And I definitely will be checking in and see how fast you're doubling your impact and when the first processing plant will be there and the first direct contracts with the feed mills and the first insects, of course.
Exactly. Thanks so much for having me, Koen.
You just listened to an interview with Jesse Solomon, founder and CEO of Emmer Co. I hope you enjoyed our discussion about changing the chicken business from the ground up. And I hope to see you back here soon for more of these podcasts. If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you and if you have the means, please join my Patreon community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on patreon.com/regenerative agriculture or in the description below. Thank you so much and see you at the next podcast. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? And what questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, agtech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. And the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning, I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're going to look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soil builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking. Click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.